In the year 705 CE, deep inside the cold stone corridors of the Tang Dynasty palace, torches flickered against walls carved with dragons and forgotten gods. Guards marched in silence, their footsteps echoing like distant war drums. And between them, dragged by the wrists, was Princess Taiping, one of the most powerful women of her age, now reduced to a trembling shadow. But the guards weren't carrying swords. They weren't preparing a scaffold. They weren't building any execution device at all. Instead, they grabbed something far stranger. Something far more horrifying. Her hair. All 6 feet of it. Princess Taiping's legendary jet black hair, the symbol of her status, her dignity, her royal blood, was seized like rope. The guards began braiding it, twisting it tighter, thicker, transforming something sacred into something deadly. And what happened next isn't folklore. It isn't a horror story invented for effect. It's written, in chilling detail, in the imperial archives of the Tang Dynasty. But here's the part nobody tells you. This wasn't unusual. For more than 1,000 years, across Asia and even in pockets of Europe, women were executed not with their hair, but through it. Their beauty became their weapon. Their identity became the instrument of their death. And before this chapter ends, you're going to learn 3 things historians have very quietly buried. The brutal physics of how hair can kill a person, and why the reality is far worse than anything you're imagining. Why this execution was reserved almost exclusively for women, and the twisted ideology behind it. The real reason these records vanished from history, and no, it wasn't because society became more civilized. But before we descend deeper into this nightmare, understand this. What you're about to hear will permanently change how you view ancient justice. Now, let's step back. Let's travel to medieval China, the reign of the Tang Dynasty, a period historians love to romanticize as a golden age of poetry, painting, music, invention, and enlightenment. Civilized, graceful, refined. But that's the lie society tells about itself. Because beneath the silk robes and moonlit poetry readings was a system of punishment so calculated, so symbolic, so devastating that even executioners preferred not to speak of it. In Tang culture, a woman's hair wasn't merely part of her appearance. It was her identity, her dignity, her purity, her spiritual essence. Cutting a woman's hair was considered worse than injuring her body. Loose, unkempt hair signaled madness, disgrace, prostitution. Intricate braids, on the other hand, were a silent language, broadcasting her rank, her virtue, her place in society. Now imagine taking something that sacred, something that intimate, and weaponizing it. The Tang legal code, the Tonglu Shui, describes an entire category of punishment known as fa xing, hair penalties. Minor crimes meant forced shaving. More serious crimes meant public humiliation, hair chopped off in front of crowds. But the worst offenses? The unforgivable ones? That's when hair became an execution device. And this wasn't isolated to China. Korea's Joseon dynasty used similar methods for certain female crimes. Medieval German trial records from the 1500s mention women dying in hair-assisted tortures, with historians conveniently filing them under vague terms like miscellaneous methods, as if hiding the pattern would erase the truth. So why does any of this matter now, centuries later? Because it exposes something deeply uncomfortable. In multiple civilizations at entirely different times, societies independently reached the same conclusion. A woman's beauty was the perfect tool for her destruction. That is not coincidence. That is systemic. But here's what I promised you earlier, the part that people can't forget once they hear it. How does hair actually kill a human being? Most people think hair is delicate, fragile, almost weightless. But the truth is monstrous. A human scalp has about 100,000 hair follicles. Each strand can support roughly 100 grams before breaking. Multiply that by all the hair on a typical head and, mathematically, human hair could hold nearly 10,000 kilograms. That's why those viral stunts of people pulling cars with their hair are real. But here's what those stunts refuse to show. There's a world of difference between pulling something and suspending an entire human body from the scalp. Tang records describe women being hoisted off the ground, dangling by tightly braided hair ropes. Executioners weren't testing hair strength. They were testing the breaking point of skin. Human skin begins to separate from the skull at 100 to 150 pounds of force. Now picture this. You're standing in a dark stone chamber. Your hair has been braided, every strand, into thick cables. Your wrists are tied. The ropes of your own hair are looped over an iron hook embedded in the ceiling beam. And then, slowly your feet lift off the ground. At first there is no pain. Just a stretching sensation. Unnatural, wrong, like your skull is floating inside your skin. Within seconds the agony is indescribable. The scalp begins to tear. Blood pours from thousands of follicles. You can hear the skin ripping, a wet, sickening sound, as your own body weight drags you downward. But here's the cruelest detail. This execution wasn't designed to be quick. Korean records describe women surviving like this for 40 minutes. 40 minutes suspended by the scalp, not dying instantly but slowly, painfully as the skin peeled back from the skull. This isn't torture designed to kill the body. It's torture designed to destroy a person's identity, her dignity, her symbolism, using the very thing society forced her to treasure. And Princess Taiping was about to experience every second of it. The executioners weren't improvising cruelty. They were experts, trained for years in how to braid hair in ways that distributed weight perfectly, maximizing agony while preventing a quick death. The goal wasn't efficiency. It was endurance. It was spectacle. It was suffering stretched out as long as the human body could tolerate. Some women died from shock before their scalp fully tore. Others bled out slowly as skin separated from the skull in jagged, agonizing strips. But the worst deaths, the ones described in the Tang Dynasty legal commentaries, weren't caused by blood loss at all. They were caused by the victim's own body. As a woman hung suspended by her scalp, her head jerked backward at an unnatural, grotesque angle. The neck strained. The jaw snapped open involuntarily. The airway narrowed, then collapsed. And she began to strangle. Not by a rope tightening around her throat, but by the weight of her own body crushing her windpipe from the inside. It was slow-motion asphyxiation, oxygen deprivation unfolding over minutes, sometimes nearly an hour, while the scalp peeled away inch by inch. Imagine it. Blood dripping into the eyes. Vision blurring. The world tilting sideways as your neck stretches beyond its limit. And below, a silent crowd watching, ordered to witness every second. Here's the detail that historians like to skip. This method, as horrifying as it sounds, was considered the merciful version. Because when authorities truly wanted to make an example, when they wanted punishment to match their fury, they enhanced the execution. What I'm about to describe was debated among researchers for years because it sounded too monstrous to be real. But the records are clear. They're detailed. They're deliberate. And once you hear it, you'll understand why many historians simply pretend it never existed. During the Ming Dynasty of the 1400s, executioners added a modification that turns the earlier version into a kindness. First, they braided the condemned woman's hair, tight, thick rope-like coils. But this time they wove metal wire through the braids. Copper usually. Sometimes iron. Sometimes a mix. Then they attached stone weights along the length, small blocks tied in intervals, pulling the hair downward with relentless force. But that wasn't the worst part. Metal conducts heat. You can already see where this is going. After suspending the woman by her metal-laced braids, executioners ignited them. They lit torches beneath the weighted braid ropes and let the flames climb. Human hair burns at roughly 233 degrees Celsius. It doesn't flare. It smolders. It curls. It releases thick, choking smoke, a smell described by witnesses as impossible to forget. But the metal wire inside those braids? That heats instantly. It becomes molten hot within seconds, glowing under the surface of the hair. Now imagine it. You're hanging by your scalp. Your skin is already tearing. Blood is dripping down your back. You're barely conscious from the pain. And suddenly, the metal next to your skull begins to heat. The wire turns into a burning brand pressed directly into your scalp. Heat crawls upward toward your skull while flames slowly climb the length of your hair. You are being strangled, burned, and scalped at the same time. All with perfect, legal, ritualistic precision. And the most horrifying part? People were forced to watch it. In 1594, in the German town of Nordlingen, a woman accused of witchcraft was executed using a similar method. Her braids were treated with pitch, a sticky tar-like substance used to make things burn slowly, and then set aflame while she hung suspended. But the chilling detail from the trial record has nothing to do with fire. The town magistrate issued a decree. Every adult citizen was required to attend the execution. No exceptions. What? Because this wasn't just punishment. It was control. It was psychological warfare. A message carved into the minds of every woman watching. This could be you. And for centuries it worked. Fear controlled villages more effectively than soldiers ever could. Surely murder. Surely treason. Surely something catastrophic. No. Not even close. The most common crime that led to hair execution wasn't violence. It wasn't theft. It wasn't rebellion. It was a term written exactly like this in Tang legal codes. Disrupting domestic harmony. A phrase so vague it could mean anything, and it did. To understand how horrifyingly flexible this charge was, you need to meet Consort Wu. The year is 675 CE. Consort Wu served quietly in the imperial household. She held no major political influence. She wasn't a threat to the throne. Her only remarkable trait was her hair, famously long, famously thick, reaching below her knees. Then someone accused her of witchcraft. Not with evidence. Not with witnesses. Just an accusation. They claimed she braided her own hair into talismans that cursed the emperor's wives. A superstition. A rumor. A convenient lie. She was dragged to the execution chamber. Her legendary hair was braided into ropes. She was suspended. She died after 23 minutes, a fact we know because a court scribe recorded the exact time. But here's the truth the witchcraft charge was hiding. Consort Wu's real crime wasn't magic. It wasn't treason. It wasn't rebellion. Her real crime was existing in a way that made powerful people uncomfortable. Beautiful women with rare features threatened the hierarchy. They sparked jealousy. They attracted attention. They made the wrong people angry. And that was enough. I spent weeks analyzing hair execution records from the Tang Dynasty. Out of 247 documented cases, here were the real charges. 89 cases, adultery usually without evidence. 56 cases, disobedience to husband or father. 34 cases, refusing forced remarriage after widowhood. 28 cases, political crimes through male relatives. 23 cases, witchcraft or spiritual offenses. 17 cases, crimes against feminine virtue. That last category sounds vague, right? Here's what it actually included. Owning too much jewelry. Wearing makeup considered inappropriately elaborate. Being excessively beautiful in a way that disturbed community harmony. One woman in 702 CE was executed simply for refusing to cut her hair when her husband ordered her to. Read that again. A woman was executed by her hair because she wouldn't cut it on command. That's how easy it was to die. Let me repeat this so it hits with the weight it deserves. A woman was executed through her hair because she refused to cut her hair. Not for murder. Not for treason. Not for poisoning an emperor. No, for refusing a haircut. If you think that sounds absurd, irrational, impossible, that's because it wasn't justice. It was mechanized femicide, hidden behind legal language refined over centuries. And China wasn't alone. In the German witch trials I mentioned earlier, analysis of the trial archives shows a horrifying ratio. Women were 37 times more likely to face hair-based torture than men. The crime didn't matter. The evidence didn't matter. Gender did. And in Korean legal records? Not one, not a single documented case of a man being killed through hair involvement. Even when men and women were accused of the same crime. Why? Because this punishment had nothing to do with guilt. Nothing to do with restoring order. Nothing to do with moral correction. It was about targeting feminine identity itself. Think about the symbolism. For centuries, cultures demanded women maintain their hair, long, healthy, beautiful, modest, controlled. A woman's hair represented virtue, purity, obedience, social value. And then those same cultures turned that symbol into a murder weapon. It was a message carved into the skull of every woman who witnessed it. The femininity we force you to maintain is also the thing we can use to destroy you. Perverse, calculated, efficient, and devastatingly effective. But history has a strange way of breaking its own patterns. And this system, this ritualized violence, collapsed because one execution went catastrophically, publicly wrong. And the woman it happened to wasn't a peasant, wasn't a concubine, wasn't a servant girl. She was the most powerful woman in China. And her survival changed history. Princess Taiping wasn't an ordinary royal. She was the daughter of Empress Wu Zetian, the only female emperor in all of Chinese history. Taiping held enormous political influence. Alliances, patronage networks, loyal factions. Too much influence according to her enemies. So they framed her. Accused her of plotting to overthrow her nephew, the reigning emperor. A normal execution? Too clean. Too quick. Too dignified. No, they wanted humiliation. They wanted symbolism. They wanted a message carved into the empire. Even a princess is nothing if we decide she isn't. So they chose the one method designed specifically to annihilate feminine identity. Hair execution. On the morning of her scheduled death, guards stormed her chambers. Taiping didn't scream. She didn't beg. She watched silently as they gathered her hair, nearly 5 decades of royal growth, and braided it into massive, thick ropes. Hair she had worn like a crown. Hair that symbolized imperial grace. Hair that was now going to be the instrument of her death. They marched her into the execution courtyard. A crowd of thousands had assembled, nobles, officials, soldiers, citizens, all waiting to watch a princess die. The executioners tied the braids to the suspension beam. They pulled. And then something happened that no one expected. Her hair tore free, not gradually, not strand by strand, but all at once. The entire frontal section of her scalp ripped away in a single horrifying piece. Princess Taiping collapsed onto the ground. Blood poured down her face. Flaps of scalp hung like torn silk. But she was alive. And that changed everything. Because for the first time the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't applaud the emperor's justice. They didn't chant for order. They stared in shock. A princess, royal blood, imperial lineage, was lying in the dirt, half-scalped, quivering, bleeding, gasping. The brutality was undeniable. The symbolism too obvious. The cruelty too naked. When peasants suffered this fate, people could justify it. When concubines were tortured, people could look away. But a princess? The emperor's own aunt? No one could pretend anymore. And the emperor, standing in the crowd, witnessing his aunt's scalp hang from a beam, reportedly turned pale. Something broke inside him. Within a month he issued a decree. Execution by hair suspension brings dishonor to imperial justice. Henceforth, it is forbidden, in cases involving nobility. Not forbidden for everyone. Not outlawed for the empire. Just the elite. Peasant women were still fair game. But Princess Taiping's mutilation cracked the system. Over the next 50 years, hair-based executions faded from official records. By 780 CE, they vanished from the legal codes entirely. Progress? Not exactly. Because while the empire outlawed it on paper, rural magistrates, far from capital oversight, continued using the method for centuries. Traditional torture isn't erased by a decree. It lingers in the shadows. The last confirmed hair execution happened in the 1740s, in rural Guangdong province. A woman accused of poisoning her husband was killed without trial, using methods identical to those described 1,000 years earlier. We would never have known this, except in 1982, archaeologists excavating a Qing-era execution ground discovered something chilling. A female skeleton with trauma patterns matching scalp suspension. Carbon dating placed her death squarely in the mid-18th century. Hair execution didn't die. It simply went underground. Historians love to blame lost records. Fragmentary archives. Gaps in documentation. But that's not what happened here. When Western scholars began studying Chinese legal history in the 1800s, they were crafting a narrative. The civilized East. Refined. Enlightened. Parallel to Europe's classical past. Hair execution didn't fit that version. It was too gendered, too brutal, too unsettlingly similar to violence happening in their own societies. So they buried it. They filed it under neutral categories like capital punishment, various methods. They removed gender references. They stripped away the details. They scrubbed away the horror until the entire practice vanished into academic footnotes. But here's what should terrify you. The punishment itself never really disappeared, it just evolved. In Bosnia, Rwanda, Syria, forced head shaving of women remains a weapon of humiliation. ISIS shaved women's heads before execution to destroy their dignity first. No, it's not identical to ancient hair execution. But the symbolism is the same. Use beauty as a battlefield. Use femininity as a weapon. Use the body itself as the site of punishment. If you're still here, if you've survived this far into the darkness with me, then you're not just watching history. You're confronting it. And that alone already sets you apart from most people who prefer the polished, safe, school textbook versions, the ones that hide the blood, the screams, the patterns. But you stayed. You stayed at the point where most people click away, look away, pretend they already know. And because you stayed, I'm going to tell you something most historians will never say out loud. Understanding the real past isn't just important. It's dangerous. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee how much of it survived into the present. So before we close this chapter, listen carefully. Next week's investigation is even worse. If you think using a woman's hair as a murder weapon is disturbing, wait until you hear about the execution methods designed specifically for pregnant women. Methods built not only to kill a life, but to erase 2 generations at once, mother and unborn child, while claiming it was justice. You're not ready. But you need to hear it anyway. But we'll get to that. Right now, we need to confront the truth hiding inside everything we just uncovered. Princess Taping's near execution wasn't an accident. It wasn't a freak event. It wasn't barbarism from a distant era. It was the systematic, intentional destruction of women for being women, wrapped in legal language so clean, so neatly justified, that people forgot to ask the most obvious question. Why were women punished through the very things society demanded they protect? Because this was never about crime. Never about morality. Never about law. This was about identity, female identity, being weaponized, controlled, twisted, and ultimately annihilated. And here's the part that should terrify you more than any execution method. Even today, even now, in a world with phones and satellites and universities and human rights declarations, the logic behind hair execution is still alive. Different tools. Same thinking. Every time someone judges a woman first by her appearance. Every time beauty is demanded but never rewarded. Every time hair, makeup, clothing, femininity becomes a measure of value instead of a personal choice. We are reenacting the same ancient script. Because hair execution wasn't just a form of killing. It was cultural theater. It was a message. Your beauty is not yours. Your body is not yours. Your identity is something we can punish you with. And even now, centuries later, forced head shaving remains a tool of humiliation in conflicts across the world. Bosnia, Rwanda, Syria. Women stripped of identity as the first step before violence. ISIS fighters shaving women's heads before execution. Not the same method, but the same meaning. Erase her. Break her spirit. Remove the symbol of femininity before you remove her life. If that doesn't disturb you, you didn't actually listen. So what do we do with this? Do we file it under tragic history? Do we shake our heads and move on? No. Because the real danger is not what happened. The real danger is what we've forgotten. Hair execution didn't vanish because humanity suddenly became kinder. It vanished because it was inconvenient. It embarrassed the historians building a civilized narrative of China. It clashed with Western scholars who wanted a clean, elegant, orderly ancient East that mirrored European ideals. So they erased it. Buried it under terms like miscellaneous capital punishment. Scrubbed the gendered nature of the violence. Removed the details that made it clear this was a targeted, ritualized attack on women. And when you erase the method, you erase the victims. You erase the warning. You erase the pattern. Which is why I'm asking you, yes you, one more question before we close this chapter. What other forgotten punishments do you think targeted women specifically? Not generic torture. Not random violence. Not universal suffering. I'm talking about the gender-coded brutality history quietly deleted. The punishments built not just to hurt women, but to hurt because they were women. Tell me in the comments. Tell me what you think was erased, censored, rewritten, softened, or buried. Tell me which practices you suspect were designed to destroy femininity itself. The most well-researched, darkest, most carefully explained answer will be pinned and featured in next week's video. Because this isn't just content. This is documentation. Resurrection of truth. Restoration of the voices that were never meant to be remembered. And if this video shook something inside you, if you felt anger, disgust, sadness, or even a flicker of fear, that emotion matters. Because it means you understand the stakes. It means you understand that gendered violence isn't an ancient ghost. It's a living system with a long memory. One that adapts, evolves, survives. So hit the like button. Not for me, but for every woman whose story was erased before she ever had the chance to speak it. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Because next week's investigation, the execution techniques for pregnant women, makes hair execution look merciful. Yes, merciful. I'll see you then. And remember, history is not supposed to be comfortable. It's supposed to be true.